where you scream, don't watch that, watch this, and I'll dive down through this hairy flesh.
Hi, and welcome to Watch This. I'm CJ Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Danielle McGrain and I have had about a month off, but now we are back and we are going to take a big look at Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, of course, has finished and now has given birth to an entire cottage industry of people talking about how Game of Thrones finished, and we are going to jump completely on that bandwagon. Needless to say, there are endless spoilers. We're going to be talking about the whole thing, including the final minute and all the minutes leading up to it. Danielle, thanks for coming back to watch this. And obviously we've come back to talk about the biggest pop cultural event in the world, outside of possibly the Avengers, but we'll leave that one behind. What did you think of this last season, these last few episodes, the last minute, the final credits?
It's a lot. That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, how do you feel about the biggest show probably ever made finally coming to an end? I think I feel a little relieved, to be honest.
I totally feel relieved.
Yeah, I think the pressure on the whole world to watch the show, to be a part of the conversation, to know what's going on. You know, I love the way after it finished, so many people who kind of came out of the woodwork and admitted to having never watched an episode. And it was like this sort of guilty secret that they all had to admit. And then after a while, they kind of looked pretty cool. They were like the cool people, the outlaws who'd never watched an episode. So that was quite funny.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said, look, there are going to be spoilers, because I was having a conversation with somebody recently and they were rewatching The Sopranos and complaining to somebody else for spoiling one of the episodes, and the other person was saying, "Come on, that's 20 years ago. You can't say anything about that. I can't be accused of spoiling it for you. Yeah. That was a massive pop cultural phenomenon." But perhaps in 20 years' time, when those outlaws go back and actually watch this show, they'll be saying, "No spoilers, please," and we'll have to say nothing about all of the things that went down.
Oh, we won't. We'll just take it, just stab something in their throat and say, don't be ridiculous. Because, I mean, one of the things this show, I suppose, had going for it was this idea that there were always going to be twists, always going to be turns. The show, it gave us this idea that we couldn't take anyone's safety for granted, although that seemed to sort of disappear in the final season or two. So what do you think? How happy with you were how it ended up?
I think that, for me, I always watched it so I knew what was going on and what people were talking about. I didn't watch it because I felt, this is my soul, this is the show that speaks to me. I remember the first two series, my husband was a big fan, and I was going, oh God, this looks really dense and kind of very male. There was all that sort of sex position in the first series as well, so I didn't always connect with it. But after a while, I suppose I did. When they modernized it and listened to fans a little bit more, I started to connect a little bit more with it. So look, the ending was good for me. I was fine with it. I thought it ended okay. I did have issues with some of what happened to some of the characters, which I'm sure we might get into, but I'm curious to know how you felt about it.
I guess I felt pretty much exactly the same way that you did, in a way. My whole thing with it was always as a fun TV show, and also to enjoy being part of the worldwide conversation. I was less interested in the deep mythology of it, and certainly less interested in the deep mythology of it going back to the original books.
Sure.
So I didn't really care about the extent to which the family's curses and lore and prophecies and all of that stuff went down. So for me, the ending was incredibly satisfying because it was very cinematic. I thought the last two episodes in particular were masterpieces of cinematic storytelling. I thought that the destruction of the big main city by Dany and her dragon was beautiful in its evocation of the napalming of Vietnam and all of that. You know, I found it had a very strong anti-war message and reminded us very viscerally of images of the devastation of war from the real world, the real news. And I thought that was obviously deliberate, and I thought that really affected me.
That's a great takeaway, actually, and something that you would hope people watching that would actually register, I suppose, somewhere in their heads. I think, sorry, before you go on, I found a lot of that as well in that final episode when we obviously see Dany addressing her troops, and it's obviously harking back to, Riefenstahl's, shots of Hitler and the Nazis. And it was like, but will everybody get that is my question. Is everybody going to pick up that these are sort of slightly subliminal messages to the rest of the world going, please don't let this happen again?
Well, in terms of the dragon fire echoing the strafing of Vietnam via napalm, I think so. I think even people who've never seen those images will have seen clips of them. They'll have seen them in clips for The Doors, or they will have seen clips for them in other movies. Do you know what I mean? So there'll be like, I remember something about the US doing something in Asia, you know, that looked exactly like that Dragonfire. And, you know, the way those stunt people and pyrotechnic people did that lighting up effect of the dragon strafing was exactly the same way that they were doing it for Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. Like, they were echoing the look of napalm. And I'm sure, I mean, to me, that's so obvious that it was deliberate. But yes, I think it will reverberate. And I think with the Danny Nuremberg rally thing, absolutely. I mean, unless you were born, you know, yesterday, you have seen either imagery of Hitler at the Nuremberg rally, or you have seen other things imitate Hitler at the Nuremberg rally. So you get what that is. You are getting the symbolism of fascism. It was very clear.
Here is a dictator. She, you know, she may be a beautiful blonde-haired dictator, but she's a dictator nonetheless. It's interesting because Emilia Clarke herself has come out and said that she watched those rallies, among other things. She's admitted to the fact that she watched those as inspiration. I think she deliberately said that. I think she's thinking about the younger generation when she's saying those words, because any celebrity these days knows that everything they say in an interview is going to get pulled apart and picked apart and looked at and brought out into another quick, you know, hit story that an online publication can push out there. I think she deliberately mentioned that. I think that they're aware of what they're putting out there, and they want people to understand that. So
in case they've got younger viewers who've never seen the Nuremberg rally or the destruction of napalm, they put it out there so that they'll then go Google it and be like, oh, I see what they're doing. That's interesting.
I think so. I hope so, because I think that is a great place to come from a fantasy show, you know, a show that is completely made up. It's a made-up language that she's even speaking, you know, the Dothraki. So I find all that really, really interesting and really, you know, I respect them for adding that layer to it, I suppose.
I also think that the big events of the last 2 episodes in particular were beautifully realised. I thought the killing of Dany by Jon Snow was perfectly done. I mean, it's been done a lot, that specific way of holding 2 people in the frame and then one of them either knifing or shooting the other one below camera. That's been done a lot. It's been done in Bond films, it's been done in Star Wars films, it's been done since the beginning of cinema, but it was very effectively done here. And for a second I wasn't sure who knifed who, which is always the trick of that particular shot. And then the way she died on the snow with the blood trickling out of her nose and mouth, I thought was gorgeous. It was beautiful.
It was.
But then the kicker of all, you know, was the dragon torching the throne, which was great, but then the dragon taking her away in its claw was perfect. What a perfect, and if the show had ended there, I would have been fine. Then we got the silly council scene, which I thought was silly. I thought Bran being elected the king was silly because Tyrion walking around being like, we got to remember what it really is that we all really want is stories, and he's got the most stories. And I think the entire world was like, what the fuck are you talking about? No, we don't all agree with that, but yes, they all agree. So that was dumb. But then the last 10 minutes, which was that long montage of the family members preparing, getting dressed, walking down corridors onto ships, etc., going off north, and you know, distributing themselves west, south, and north was stunning, you know, and that's what you needed. You wanted to elevate it from something that was plot-driven to something that was cinematic and poetic, and that's what they did with those last 2 episodes.
Yeah, that's true. It's true, and in a sense, like, you know, all the characters sort of ended up in the rightful place, even though perhaps some of them shouldn't. You know, I mean, Jon Snow was really somebody they were supposedly trying to punish at the end for killing the Queen, but even that was sort of. I didn't. It
was glossed over.
Well, I loved the scenes of Jon, sort of, you know, harrowing scenes where he's in the sort of the cell, and the idea that he's gone through the sort of very dark night of the soul, because he's not only killed the person he loved, but he's killed, you know, the Queen, and he's grappling with all of that. Interesting that he then just gets exactly what he wants, but at the same time, I'm thinking, why were they not sort of more celebratory of the killing of a dictator, which is basically what happened? So it's I'm torn about what really was the right action in that case. But just quickly to talk about Bran the Broken, the King Bran the Broken, I know that it seems like a sort of a strange choice, but in a way he was really the only choice they could have that wasn't, it was sort of impartial in a sense. You know, some people say Arya should have done it because she killed the Night King, she basically saved the world. That, you know, the way that Daenerys' descent into madness was done, a lot of people disagree with that. Happened very quickly, you know, ultimately she was this wonderful, you know, savior before that, and that happened very quickly. Jon Snow is obviously a very popular character, certainly popular when it came to sort of the wartime and having all the troops behind him. But when you think about it, Bran's the guy who's probably going to be able to warg into a dragon. Is there anything more powerful than that?
I don't know, because
he's the guy.
To me, the show never, ever convinced me about what was going on in Bran's head. So to me, that character doesn't work. In fact, when someone does a 9-hour supercut, and releases it as 3 movies, like the Lord of the Rings movies, 9-hour trilogy, I think they just remove Bran entirely. You'll see the little boy climbing up the thing and seeing the brother and the sister fucking, and then Jaime will come push him and he'll plunge to his death. That'll be it. No more Bran.
Perhaps.
They'll cut him out entirely.
Perhaps.
To me, the show was always most importantly about the Lannisters rather than the Starks.
Right.
And I thought the most affecting and intriguing plotline of all was the relationship between the 2 screwing siblings and their brother, the Imp. So you've got Tyrion, Jaime, and Cersei. And Jaime and Cersei in particular, I thought were the most fascinating dynamic. I mean, they were brother and sister having sex and in love with each other. His realization that by loving someone horrendous, he must also be horrendous, I thought was the best sort of revelation moment of the entire series. And I thought that was an excellent choice for him to realise that he had to return to her. And the way that they died together under that thing was perfect to me, that they were crushed by their own keep. I loved all that.
And I suppose a lot of people talking about that final shot of them when Tyrion discovers them, that they're like twins in the womb again, back, kind of gone full circle. And, there is something quite beautiful in that. But I didn't believe the Jaime arc. I believed that he was finding the good in himself, that he'd been led down a path by Cersei, that by hooking up with Brienne of Tarth and helping them fight fight in the north, fight against the Ice King and the White Walkers, I feel like he was discovering that good side of himself. So when he actually told Brienne that he was returning to Cersei because he loved her, I actually thought, no, he's going to kill her because he feels he's the only one who can maybe get close enough. Just as Jon Snow and Daenerys, he was really the only person to be able to get close enough to do that to her. So I was really surprised.
Oh, in a good way?
No, I wanted to see Jaime come full circle and come out of her grips, because that was an abusive relationship as far as I was concerned.
I thought that's why it was the perfect ending. I think he was a victim to his own love, and he wore that in the end. He was like, look, I've told her I love her, so I've got to go back to her. I got to say, him having the sex with Brienne and Arya having the sex with Gendry, I thought those were a bit too fan servicey moments. I mean, like, neither of those little evenings in the hay contributed really to my enjoyment of the entire Game of Thrones experience.
I guess that's the question, though, with this final season in particular. Were they servicing the fans a little too much? That's the question, isn't it? And that's as much as we might get sort of annoyed or bored by the dense mythology that was at play, certainly in the first few series, it really felt like these last 2 seasons were all about what's going to kind of keep the fans happy. Once George R.R. Martin's involvement was sort of stepped back. But I respect, too, the fact that it did become very cinematic, as you say. Each episode this season was like a mini film. They were over an hour long. You did feel like you were watching a creation, a beautiful creation. So I respect that, but I'm not sure about some places where the plot went. Sometimes it felt a bit simplistic.
Yeah, well, we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, but others are doing that. So we'll let you go. Sorry, my throat sounded so... It feels like I've been walking around in that ash that pervaded the... Remember the final episode? Yes. It seemed like they were in snow for the first half an hour or 45 minutes, but it was actually just ash. I mean, that was beautiful. There were clever bits like that.
Yeah. Okay.
You've been watching Danielle McGrain and CJ Johnson with Watch This. We'll be back next week.